lot of Democrats, a lot of progressives are asking the question now in this midterm election year as we close in on the midterms, is there a new path for the left? And there's certainly a new effort underway to try to channel progressives and leftists towards certain policies. And here to talk about that is Dálida Rocha. She is an executive director of Renew US. Dálida, I think I mispronounced your last name. It's Hasha, right?
Yes.
Okay, sorry about that. First of all, tell me about this new effort and what's the goal here?
Yeah, so Renew US, an organization, national organization, really thinking about how do we build a path forward, right? We know that the power of the right didn't just emerge. They really invested in local races. They really invested their power. And we as the left need to do the same.
Well, to that point, in terms of, the right, focusing on local issues. So it sounds like your effort, Renew US, as opposed to thinking about, federal elections, presidential elections, Senate and House, this really is aimed at state and local races.
Yeah, so we know that the power flows upward, and that is why the right really invested in the states, and that is we have to do the same, right? We have to make sure that we invest in power locally because the power flows upward.
Now, there's an argument that Republicans say, look, it's a lot easier for them, perhaps, and I think it's not just Republicans making this argument, but it's a lot easier for Republicans to say, look, when it comes to our local school board or our local town elections, we can identify the clear, let's get the teachers out of our families, let's pull certain books. There's certain things Republicans can identify in terms of local issues that seem to resonate for them. How do progressives try to get, for example, on the issue of climate justice, make that connection with local issues and local races?
We have to address, there is so many issues. That is the problem, right? There is the ecological issue. We have immigration issue. There is so many issues. And they're all intertwined. And that has been the problem where we're as progressives or as the left, however you identify, we at times tend to work in silos as if the issues are not intertwined. And that is what we have to do, recognize that all the issues are intertwined and make sure that we're coming together to build the power and work on the issues.
And when you build on, say, the issue of racial justice, what does that look like at the local level?
So racial justice at the local level, like I said, a lot of the issues are intertwined, right? So we have to make sure that when we're talking about environmental justice, that we are not stripping the racial justice, the economic justice pieces out of, environmental justice in climate change, right? When we're talking about education, that we are making sure that we are not stripping the racial justice piece out of, education justice or criminal justice. We have to make sure that we continue to look at the issues through the lenses of race. And that I know can be uncomfortable, but that is what we have to do in order to move forward as a state, as a country.
And you're banding together with candidates. I believe it's 12 states. Is that correct?
Correct. Yes. And
so you're essentially, I guess, funneling money and support to them. What do the candidates have to do in order to get the support of Renew US?
So first, in order to endorse candidates, Renew doesn't have this model of just like going into state and doing the work ourselves. We really partner up with our anchor organizations. So before we can endorse a candidate, they have to be endorsed by a partner organization that we trust on the ground. And then once a partner organization endorsed them, then Renew asked candidates to sign a pledge with us. And the pledge really make sure that the candidate commits to fighting for racial justice, immigrant justice, economic justice, environmental justice. And once they sign that pledge, then we can endorse and support them.
And has it been very difficult or easy for the candidates to sign that pledge?
Yes, a lot of the candidates, it's very easy for them to sign the pledge because this is what they already stand for, right? Because we want to endorse progressive candidates. And as I said, we trust our anchor organization to make sure that they are supporting progressive candidates. However, there are candidates that don't feel comfortable signing a piece of paper that says that they commit to racial justice. And if they don't sign, we just don't support them as a candidate.
Now, in looking at the 12 states where Renew US is trying to sort of operate and be helpful, Arizona, Kentucky, Connecticut, Georgia, Indiana, Maine, Massachusetts, Michigan, North Carolina. Texas is not part of that 12. California, New York, not part of that 12. How come?
So the co-founders of Renew really sat through a deep dive of where we needed to build power, of where we had organizations that we trusted, and those are the states. First 6 states, and then I came on board and expanded into the other 6 states. But that doesn't mean we're not going into the states that you mentioned. It just means that we need to figure out what is needed, because Renew is about filling in the gaps, right? So figuring out what is needed, figuring out if we have the resources before we can expand into other states.
For the candidates who are endorsed by Renew, what is their biggest challenge? What is Renew US's biggest challenge in terms of trying to sell these policies towards local voters and in some of these elections?
Well, some of the challenges is we as voters sometimes don't lean into abundance. We've been told that we have to fight for scraps. And there's always this question of how are we going to do that? Where's the funding going to come from? And sometimes that is the struggle, right? Of really convincing the voters that we have enough resources in this country to make sure everyone has their basic needs fulfilled, and to make sure that we can work towards something bigger, right? But because we've been so conditioned to fight for to believe that we don't have enough and fight for the little bit that we think we have, sometimes it's hard for voters to truly believe that we do have enough.
And that's been a consistent argument that's been made to progressives in general, that, oh, you should be more pragmatic and just try to, move to the center to help win elections, and then we can make some change at the margins. But I keep hearing from a lot of progressives, people on the left, that no, the way to energize voters is to be passionate about these issues and to make pledges like what Renew US is asking the candidates to do.
Exactly.
Now, how optimistic are you that that translates into victories this fall in the midterms, and where are you most optimistic?
In 2020, when we launched, we endorsed 200 candidates, and we had about 64% of our candidates win. So there is a path forward, and it's not always going to be the case that we're going to have 60-70% of our candidates win. But we have to continue to build. What we can't do is give up, right? And here in Massachusetts, I live in Massachusetts, we saw some great wins, progressive and then we saw a lot of progressive who lost against incumbents, and there's so much lessons there, and we have to sit with those lessons and be able to go at it again. We just can't give up. Yeah,
and one of I think the greatest challenge in terms of getting rid of the incumbents is so many of them are taking money from fossil fuel companies and PACs, and you're making sure that your candidates do not take money from fossil fuels. And I imagine just purely in terms of political strategy, financing, that puts your candidates at somewhat of a disadvantage.
Yes, and we have a candidate here in Massachusetts who lost against an incumbent by 50 votes, right? And as I was talking to her, she said, if I just had a little bit more money, which means that we have to continue to engage our people, because the little bit that you have, if you can give $5, if you can give $10, it's going to go a long way for a candidate. Because now imagine 50 votes, that is so painful.
Are there particular state legislatures where you see as being sort of fertile ground for these efforts? I mean, just in looking at the list, I mean, Arizona is sort of interesting, but North Carolina, it's sort of in the South. I mean, some of these legislatures are, a lot of them Republican dominated in terms of state lawmakers, but it seems like there's so much that happens at the state level.
Yeah, for sure. So, for example, in Indiana, it's just Indiana needs a lot of investment there, right? And there is a path forward, and that is one of the the states, especially Northwest Indiana, that is so ripe, and we want to be able to invest there, looking towards 2030. Some of the states that we're in is not going to be a 2-3 year cycle to really win power, but it's going to be a little bit longer. But we are committed to staying and investing and win that power.
Well, it's certainly music to my ears whenever I hear anybody talking about Democrats in Indiana, because I grew up there. And while it is known as a very conservative state, there are these pockets, whether it's Indianapolis or the northwest part of the state with Gary and South Bend, where there are some, liberal enclaves. And there's also these policies that I think even sort of centrist voters are sort of more amenable to. So I think Indiana's a great choice. I'm also sort of intrigued by Georgia, which is, of course, on everybody's sort of battle list.
Exactly. Georgia, there was so much work happening in Georgia. Our partner is really on the ground. There is so much potential there, and a lot has been done already. And obviously, Renew can't take the credit for it, but we are there now and just doing amazing work. And I can't wait to see what happens in the near future with Georgia.
Well, the organization is Renew US, and Dálida Rocha is the executive director. It's a relatively new organization. Dálida, thanks so much for coming on, and good luck to you.
Oh, thank you. Thank you for having me.